Welcome back to the 6Ps podcast and welcome to our first video for 2021. Today we're going to be looking at a sample essay from Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 film, Rear Window. So hopefully you're all pretty familiar with essay writing by now. You would have done it for a couple of years. Again, make sure you're writing lots and lots of essays. The first bit of advice I always give is to look at every single word in the topic and to make sure you are addressing them all. This is a piece of advice that the VCAA have emphasised in their exam reports of the past couple of years. Sometimes missing one word can make all the difference. We're going to see that a little bit later on. But to give you an example now, if the question talks about all characters are this and this, you need to address whether it is all characters or whether it's no characters, whether it's all bar one character. That needs to be addressed in your introduction particularly, but it needs to be addressed in your essay. So make sure you look at every single word. The second piece of advice is the fact there are no set answers, contentions, arguments, or structures when it comes to responding to an essay topic. That's really important. It's not like other subjects where the examiners have set answers that they need in order to give you the marks. There aren't. Same deal with your contention. You can agree with the topic, disagree with the topic, sit on the fence. You can sit anywhere on that continuum and still get a really good mark. So don't feel like when you're looking at topics that you need to find the right contention. You know, that's not the case. You need to have a clear contention, obviously, but it doesn't matter which way you argue as long as you do it in a really precise and detailed way. Same deal with arguments. You know, there aren't simply 3 arguments for each contention. There are hundreds of arguments that you could go with. Don't feel like you're in the right or wrong space. You know, go with ones that are going to solidify your contention. And same deal with structure. I think structure is really important. Don't get me wrong, in an essay, particularly if you're not too sure how to go about it. I think topic sentences and using things like teal and using adverbs are really, really important in terms of ensuring that you can address the topic in good depth. But in essence, what the examiners always say is a good essay is a good essay. So if you hear someone say, oh, don't put a quote there, put a quote here, in the end, it doesn't really matter. For me, I really like my quotations as my evidence. I don't like quotations in my intros and my topic sentences. That's not to say you can't get a good mark by using them, because some students use them really, really well. Again, my biggest piece of advice when it comes to this is to seek feedback from your teacher and to keep writing, because as you keep writing, you grow in confidence. Another bit of advice, look for some next level examples. So don't simply rely on characters and quotations as your evidence. We should be looking at other evidence. What do I mean by that? We're looking at things like symbols and motifs. In the case of Rear Window, we're looking at film techniques, maybe some context information. If it's a play, you might be looking at stage directions. So again, look for that next level analysis to add depth and to, I think, showcase your knowledge of the text, which examiners want to see. The last thing, and it's a little bit similar to the first piece of advice, and it's a piece of advice that I give the most when it comes to Year 12 English, in fact, English in general, RTFQ, ATFQ. Read the question, answer the question. It's as simple as that. As long as you answer the question, that is the most important thing. If you write a beautiful essay that's got nothing to do with the topic, you're going to be in a bit of strife, I'm sorry to say. So again, that topic should be in the forefront of your mind at all times. Personally, I used to write my essay topics on the top of each page as I wrote it, or had it there in front of me just so it was always visible and always in the front of my mind. So the topic we're going to have a look at today is, in Rear Window, Hitchcock presents a cynical view of relationships. Discuss. Looking at this essay topic, the first thing I like to do is pick out the key words. When it came to this topic, there was one clear keyword. Any ideas what that might be? Yeah, it's the word cynical. That is so important. And unfortunately, this was on the VCAA exam in 2019. A lot of students missed this. And so therefore, they just looked at how Hitchcock presented relationships, and they just looked at different types of relationships. So they might look at, marriage being traditional, or marriage being more modern, or the way neighbors react with each other, or how men react with each other, or how women, they didn't look at the idea about whether it was a cynical view of relationships that Hitchcock was depicting here. And that is what was most important. So regardless of how well you explored and analysed the film and looked at characters and film techniques and symbols and the context, you really need to address that idea that Hitchcock is actually being quite cynical here. If you did that, as you can probably tell by reading through the exam report, you're one step ahead of half the field, really. So again, it's really important that, again, you bring your dictionaries to your SACs and to your exams. It's going to be really, really useful. And for me, that is an easy way, simply by reading the full question, an easy way to get a step ahead of the competition. So we're going to read through an introduction now. For me, an introduction is all about introducing the film, studying your contention, and outlining your arguments. Again, if you're new to sort of essay writing, my advice would be to do this as clearly as possible, as fluently as possible. Initially, furthermore, ultimately, these kinds of phrases work really well to begin your sentences, to be really, really explicit. As you're building confidence, you can start to be a bit more implicit with your writing style. So again, we're looking for a contention and a couple of arguments. So set against the post-war American backdrop, Hitchcock's 1954 film Rear Window challenges the innateness of self-interest to human motivations and interactions. Throughout the film, marriages are considered utterly artificial and doomed constructions formed from cultural expectations and a means for socio-economic mobility. However, the cynical perceptions permeate beyond constructs, highlighting the reprehensible nature or the unjust nature of its participants' gendered distrust. Ultimately, Hitchcock's production reflects upon a broader society encumbered by endemic McCarthyism and a return to traditionalism or traditional values. The first thing I'll say about this introduction is I find it to be a little bit wordy, and that's not to say there's some really good vocab in there, but I would be definitely toning it down a little bit. I've looked to highlight for me the essay topic and also the arguments in this case. So you'll see the words in red. We've got the words interactions or relationships and cynical. So the topic's been addressed there. We see this idea that, okay, yeah, there is a cynical view of relationships to sort of begin with. There's a bit of hope at the end though, I guess, for the characters, for the society. If you look at the three arguments, the first one focuses on this depiction of marriage that's seen to be artificial or superficial. The second one, we're looking at relationships, the cynical view and gender and the distrust between the genders. And then the third argument is one that I really like to do with like a context argument, one that focuses on society, one that is fueled by McCarthyism. If you're not too sure what McCarthyism is, look at the background information video. It's really important that you know that. I would be mentioning McCarthyism in my essay somewhere, I would be thinking. But this ultimate idea that there is that return to traditional values in the text, particularly when it comes to marriage. Again, a little bit wordy, but there is some, as I said, there is some really nice vocab in there that I quite like. So looking at main body paragraphs, for me, this is where you can show off intros, conclusions. Okay, you're stating information. In your main body paragraph, so you really want to flesh these out. You really want to show off your knowledge of the text and your ability to analyze, explore a topic and all the implications of the topic as well. So you're not just looking at the surface, you're looking much, much deeper than that. As you can see, this is a pretty long main body paragraph, but I will begin with the topic sentence. From the outset, Rear Window illustrates the deterioration of a marriage's blissful beginnings into domestic imprisonment as a consequence of its egocentric roots. Again, a little bit wordy, but the main thing here is that, Rear Window does look at this idea that marriage begins in a really happy, optimistic way, and slowly but surely, characters, both men and women, find themselves confined and imprisoned. Hitchcock exemplifies modern marriage and its linear progression as the framing of the Thorwald separates husband and wife, whereas inversely, the newlyweds occupy the same window frame, and this is seen towards the start of the film. By utilising the apartment's fenestration or windows to juxtapose the two married units, Hitchcock elucidates marriage's inevitable downfall into despair and spite. Again, the verb elucidates there. I really like explanation verbs like that. It's really important that you're not just introducing or bring in evidence. You need to explain it in relation to the essay topic, that's done there. If we continue, it goes on to say this foreshadowing is realised when the newlyweds are seen bickering in the closing scene as the wife argues she wouldn't ever have gotten married if he'd told her he'd quit his job. Through constructing the couple's finale as an antithesis to the film's joyous resolution, Hitchcock portrays a cynical depiction of marriage that directly alludes to financial security and monetary means being its true motivations. So again, we see a really direct emphasis on the topic there, the cynical depiction of marriage, clearly going back to the essay topic there. Similarly, Rear Window's Greenwich Village setting is enveloped or ensconced by overpowering brick walls, ultimately equating marriage to a household prison. Thus, Hitchcock draws parallels between matrimony, confinement, and isolation. The word matrimony is used a fair bit instead of marriage. So if you're always saying marriage, you can use matrimony. Sometimes it can be a bit clunky, but it sort of works here. In this way, viewers are confronted by a cynical presentation of marriage characterized by self-interest and never being able to go anywhere, rather than any apparent love or worthwhile affection. Likewise, the film is primarily shot from within Jeffrey's apartment, a confined and claustrophobic space, isolating them to one perspective. Before I go to the linking sentence, I just want you to make note of the different the different evidence that's being used here. We see some quotations from characters in there as well. We see the setting, so the Greenwich Village and the bricks. We see the windows as well. We've got some film techniques in terms of it's shot from Jeffrey's perspective. So we've also got some structure as well there in terms of the beginning of the film and the end of the film. So in this case, they've shown a really strong knowledge of the text and used this evidence in terms of exploring this idea that there is this really cynical representation of marriage in the film throughout the film. The linking sentence here, in revealing marriage's degradation and seclusion, the film exposes the conceited concerns innate to marriage and broad human connections. With linking sentences, I really like them. I really want to make sure the examiner knows that I am responding to the topic, but there's no reason why it can't be more implicit with that and weave it throughout your main body paragraphs. In this case, though, I like the way they've used their evidence here. It's less wordy at times as well, which I really like as well, but I really like the idea of how they've explored these particular examples in relation to the topic and their argument. So, with main body 2 and 3, we're just going to look at topic sentences and then some potential evidence you might want to use, and it might be worthwhile writing a couple of paragraphs on these yourselves. So, main body paragraph 2. In a caricature of 1950s America, Hitchcock underlines the cynical perceptions of women from men, elevating a straightforward murder mystery plot to a discourse of latent violence arising from contemporary masculine views. Again, quite a long, wordy topic sentence. I think some of this could be used in a second sentence, but it focuses on this idea of gender. In this way, what evidence might you use? I think the establishing sequence when you've got the double negative of the model is really cool to use. I like that. It's I think anyway shows the way that Jeffries views women, and also I guess the fashion world as well, and I guess by extension Lisa and Lisa's job and Lisa's worth in the world. A symbol I really like is a portable keyhole. It's a quote as well as a symbol. It's Jeffries' long focused lens. It's a phallic substitute, I guess you could say, but it really links nicely to this idea of masculinity, particularly Jeffries' masculinity, the way he feels he fits into his relationship, where he feels emasculated by Lisa. The depiction of women's bodies is definitely a motif, particularly when you look at Miss Torso. There's that scene in the middle of the film where Jeffries he's talking about it and he's looking at Miss Torso and he says, now, how would you begin to cut up a human body? I think that's a really good example that you can use. The other one I was thinking of is I think as that scene is happening, you've got that really joyful music in the background as well, that Carnevale di Venezia in the background as well. So a nice juxtaposition there as well of the really dark and gruesome details that Jeffries is talking about with the really happy music in the background. These are just some ideas you can sort of look at. But yeah, definitely looking at men and women and gender, which is a really important theme. With main body paragraph 3, the topic sentence we've gone with here is that Hitchcock imparts the viewer with a broader society gripped by McCarthyism. You probably could say actually Hitchcock presents the viewer with a broader society gripped by McCarthyism and rife with dysfunctional relationships and cynicism towards women and a broken community. And I really want to talk about neighborhoods here, particularly. I think with this particular topic, when people look at relationships, they look at just the men and women, which are depicted in the film. I think as a neighborhood, though, that's really important, the relationships there. Yes, the Greenwich Village neighborhood and the setting, you can particularly use that as evidence. I'll get on to the neighbors in a moment. Stella talks about society in general, suggesting that we've become a race of peeping toms, fueled by McCarthyism that pervaded society and really rife with suspicion of others. And in fact, the idea that you were encouraged to spy on your neighbours is a really important point to make. When it does come to societal, social isolation, to neighbourhood, to community, the scene that jumps out is that of the dog owner, the female dog owner, who screams out from the top of the balcony. She says, "Neighbours like each other, speak to each other, care if anybody lives or dies, but none of you do." It's a much longer quote than that. You could pick out any part of that, but for me, that is a really interesting depiction of these people who have their windows open that live quite close to each other, but actually there's no real neighbourly affection. It's not just the death of the dog. We also see at the start of the film the female character with a hearing aid. It's up to you what you want to call her. It could be, I've heard her being called Miss Hearing Aid before. The sculptor is another one. I sort of avoid the sculptor just because it's interesting how a lot of the male characters are, described by their occupation, whereas the females more so for their physical appearance or their relationship status, in the case of Miss Lonely Hearts. But she offers some advice to Lars Thorwald and he tells her to shut up. So that's might be a little snippet of a scene you might look at. The last one in terms of looking at broader society is the breaking of the fourth wall, where the audience is sort of complicit in the immoral behaviour, questionably immoral behaviour, and the fact that that's a reflection of society, and it poses the question to the audience about whether the behaviour is moral or not. So a little bit you can look at there, again, focusing on this idea of neighbourly relationships and whether this is a real neighbourhood where people do care for each other or whether they don't. It's up to you. You can look at it from in the beginning, the middle, and even the end. When, for me, the idea that, and it's a small thing as well, the dog owners have a new dog. So they've learned to trust the neighbourhood again. I think that's a really important point that doesn't get discussed a lot, but clearly something's happened there where she's able to trust them again. So again, these are all ideas and suggestions. You don't have to use any of them, but I think they're worth looking at and exploring if you've got the time. With conclusions, I like to be really brief with mine. The main thing for a conclusion is, well, firstly, my advice would be don't include any new information. For me, it's all about sort of emphasising that contention, restating those arguments. You might want to finish on what might be your third main body paragraph or your best piece of analysis. You might save that for your last sentence of your conclusion. In this case, it's pretty brief. It just goes throughout Rear Window. The tone remains overtly gloomy, applying an antagonistic perspective to marriage, the populace, and distinctly human structures. Hitchcock's interpretation of a society laden by McCarthyism is a culture that exudes distrust, apathy, and paranoia, although not without some semblance of hope, which we sort of spoke about there at the very end of the film.